Two-tier Reeves, celebrating America and broadcasting hate speech. Welcome to Mark and Pete, two blokes with half an opinion. Now, here's our first thought for today.
Political damp squib. Tears and tantrums come from what a politician believes, where outpouring flows as the market grieves. But if you're the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, you may be wearing soggy sleeves.
Yeah.
Yes, unfortunately, as we've seen in Parliament recently, Rachel Reeves was crying while Sir Keir Starmer was addressing Parliament. Now, we're not entirely sure why this was. It seems as though it was a personal matter. But was it? Was there really a hidden agenda? Is really Rachel Reeves just simply crying for the bad policies that we see flowing out from her tears of joy that things are going well? Or maybe, Mr. Pete, is it possibly that the rivers of sorrow are flowing across the United Kingdom? What do you think, Mr. Pete, about the way that Rachel Reeves performed in Parliament?
Well, Mr. Mark, it's interesting, isn't it? We have a problem really with PR here, in that you finally get your first female, the first woman Chancellor of the Exchequer, and she goes and cries in Parliament. It's almost like a stereotype, isn't it? Of well, this is why we don't want women taking on this sort of job. They'll only break into tears. They're too emotional. Now, I don't know that that's the case, since we had a female prime minister who didn't look like she was going to break into tears. She looked like she might well eat you alive, as in Margaret Thatcher. But no, it is interesting that she was brought to tears when you might think that actually it's pretty much the rest of the country should be in tears from the decisions that have been taken. But perhaps she was crying for us, because what had happened was she had tried to cut spending, and then suddenly that was reversed. So they can't afford it. We can't afford it. There isn't the money to pay.
You can't afford it.
To pay the continuing welfare payouts. The welfare reforms were stymied, and so therefore we had heard, maybe just exasperated. There's, we're going to have our government go the way of a previous government when, if you remember, there was a Conservative government in which the Prime Minister was only around for a few days, and during that time he managed to put a proposal to slash taxes and increase spending, and that does not work. Slashing tax is good, but you've got to cut the spending as well to suit. So what we have, all have a real agenda for growth, but that's not what we saw then. That's not what we're seeing now. So I think that the tears may well have been ones of exasperation and the whole thing just coming down, and maybe not long for a job, but certainly see that all her best efforts have come to nothing. It could have been due to that. Of course, you could be right that it's a personal issue, but I don't remember that happening before. Someone just sitting there crying in Parliament. So maybe it was a whole concatenation of all those points. Now, because we don't want to get our listeners too angry or get cancelled, I'm not going to say something like, well, it's probably the time of the month, because that would be uncalled for. So yeah, that's my brief thoughts of it. I think that she was was emotional, but I mean, is it a bad thing? Well, I don't think it is a bad thing, in that it seems to reveal the exasperation she had. If anything, she was right to be upset with what was being proposed.
Well, what's interesting is that Sir Keir Starmer has said that actually Rachel Reeves is doing an excellent job as Chancellor.
Yes.
Well, I'm not entirely sure whether he's really aligned with everyone else in Parliament. Because it is true that there's a lot of pressure on Parliament today. Let's face it, the debt is rising, the economy is not booming. There are certainly broken aspects of all areas of our society, whether it be through increased crime and many other different things that we know and love. But here's the thing. Is interesting about this is people's opinions of what is a weepy chancellor sitting
Yeah.
there crying. And some people think that actually it's a good thing because it's unlike, other professions where you may have a bad day, you may even cry at work, but you're not really exposed to the entire nation. And
Yes.
ironically, Rachel
Yeah.
Reeves actually came out the following day and said she recognized the fact that, this was unusual and she is in the spotlight, and so therefore every moment of her of emotion is going to be there for the record. But let's take that as being something which is fine in a society that accepts that emotions can unfold. Usually we're seeing politicians pointing fingers, being very angry, and their eyes are shot red, just simply really having conflict with their opponents. But in this particular case, it's like somebody has capitulated. But my take on this is that I don't have a problem with somebody being like that. What I do have a problem with is it really sort of has got away from the point, which is we're still not progressing. And as much as you can look at an individual and feel sorry for them, it takes nothing away from what has been a year of really a bad first term. And I think that what I'm concerned about is that what we now have is I think there's going to be more tears, folks. Why? Because as you referenced before, the welfare state is not great. And I think that what's going to happen is that the cuts that were originally planned, which are no
Yeah.
longer there, means that Rachel Reeves, ironically, is probably going to have to hand out a large box of tissues to
Yeah.
everyone come August when it comes to things like tax hikes, because the only other way that I think that she's got to pull levers to retrieve cuts is around tax. Now, that could come in the form of national insurance, or it could be on individuals and many other forms of tax. So maybe that when it comes to people crying in public, I think that the whole nation might be out there with soggy sleeves. Let's move on to a different subject. And this is one which is possibly or maybe not a form of celebration.
Mm.
And that is when the stars are not aligned. If you were born on the 4th of July and also feeling smug and smitten, where stars are spangled and flying high, then you're probably not from Britain. Yes, well, it's as we've seen that the United States have been celebrating Independence Day. That's the 4th of July. Yes, it's the federal holiday in which the United States commemorates the adoption of the Declaration of Independence from Britain. And this happened in 1776. Now, Mr. Pete, I ask you, the 4th of July is always there on the calendar, and many Americans do celebrate it. But what I will say is that is really celebrating all that is America good today when we see some of the challenges that we face? What say you?
Well, Mr. Mark, I think that it's all well and good to celebrate what is effectively the founding of your nation. I think if you can't have pride in your nation, then there's something very wrong, because you should be able to celebrate the group that you're part of. Celebrate your family, celebrate your football team, even if you're into that sort of
Mhm.
nonsense. Celebrating your country and its founding is a good thing in itself. Whether you can celebrate everything about America, well, no, I don't think that is true. But that doesn't take away from the celebrations on July the 4th. The thing that's, I guess, questionable is the use of the 4th of July celebrations as a political moment. Like we can look at this 4th of July that's just gone, where President Trump used it as the time to sign the passing of his one big, beautiful bill. Beautiful big bill. Anyway,
Yes.
three B's in it somewhere. Now, uh, that was being used in order to forward his agenda. So the national pride, patriotic fervour was being used to give extra impetus to his popularity, the popularity of his agenda. Um, that's not. I'm saying that's not necessarily a good thing. I mean, I don't know what you could do about it, but that's the bit that could possibly be questionable if you were not on politically on the side of the president. You want the president to celebrate your country without necessarily pushing his own political agenda, and that's not the way it's gone. I'm not sure that that's ever been done, but President Trump recently really went for it in using the the atmosphere of July the 4th, the pro America fervour, to just push his own agenda. Um,
Yes.
Good or bad? Well, I think it's just the way politics works.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because to your very point that having a national identity is a good thing. Now, clearly, in this particular case, having independence, having your own ability to take your own future into your own destiny, that all those sort of things are very good. And when it's actually maybe hijacked for political reasons, that is something, as you've highlighted, is perhaps doesn't always sit well with people. Now, interestingly, after voting for independence, Congress turned its attention to the Declaration of Independence and a statement explaining for this decision, which was prepared by the Committee of Five, which was asking basically Thomas Jefferson to author its first draft. So way back in 1776, and I'm sure that you remember, Mr.
Yeah,
Pete,
very, very
after you were
well.
kicked
Yeah.
out,
Hmm. Yes.
he actually only took 17 days to write it. And he did it by himself, and then he was then obviously validated and put into place. Interestingly, that when you look at the Constitution and what it really means for the United States, I think that there is a national pride. And the reason I highlight this is that the Americans do have a lot to be proud of. If you think of what's happened in innovation through technology, through culture, etc., they've contributed a great deal to the world. So many people, when we talk about celebrations of the United States, it doesn't have to be related just to the United States. I mean, people around the world have really sort of enjoyed a lot of prosperity as a result of what America has brought to the world, whether it be things in music, whether it be in manufacturing, and many other things in science, going to the moon, maybe a few other things as well. And there's a very, very long list. And it's interesting that because when you talk to Americans, they often don't always see it in the sense that maybe they're not the oldest nation in the world, but really, when I look at it, I sort of think of that intense and really dramatic innovation that and growth that they've seen over the last few hundred years. I mean, it is a great case study, isn't it? That once you take your own identity into your own control, you really can have tremendous influence and you can bring a lot of positives. So I think there is a good thing about celebrating the 4th of July just for that alone.
Yes. Now, yeah, it's interesting that when you look back at the founding of America, you can see that because it took on board in its very founding Christian principles. In fact, the founding fathers, as they know, wrote uh, the Constitution, wrote the Declaration of Independence. Now they were all Christians of different hues. Some of them, some of them less heretical than others. But one thing that they had in common was belief that you should have your nation being under the rule of God, the Christian God, not some other God. Um, and there's the famous Liberty Bell, which supposedly is rung to celebrate the founding. I mean, it's cracked, so you can't you can't ring it anymore. Perhaps that's something prophetic. But written on it, is why I'm mentioning it, is Leviticus 25, verse 10, a verse from the Bible, which says, "Proclaim liberty throughout all the land, and unto the inhabitants thereof." So this, and that's part of the overall mythos of July the 4th and the founding of America. And I think that is a good thing to celebrate. From a Christian standpoint, all nations should be Christian. And of course, we're not saying it's not saying that by force you should make them Christian. They should want to be Christian. If they become Christian, that is something to celebrate. So I think, in terms of America, it's a good thing to celebrate. There, you've got a Christian nation with all the good ethics and morality that entails, and also the blessing of God which that procures. So, good thing to celebrate, and to remind we can remind ourselves here in Britain we're a Christian nation as well. I know we're on the losing end of the July 4th celebrations, but we can at least remind ourselves of that as we shed a quiet tear for the loss of the great prairies that I believe King George cried over that as well.
Well, indeed. Well, let's move on to a different subject. Tears may be of unease. And
Yes.
this is a controversial subject, but we're going to end this show with this subject going viral. Hate speech has wide reach as it spreads like a viral disease from a vile preach to a broadcast breach. It leads to unsocial unease. Yes, many people will know that when the BBC broadcast the recent Glastonbury performances, there were some great shining stars that actually entertained the public. Unfortunately, what we did see also was Bob Vylan's controversial set, where they actually chanted "Death, death to IDF," which is essentially the Israeli Defense Forces. So, Mr. Pete, I ask you, first of all, should a platform of that kind be something that any artist should be able to chant political rhetoric? And more importantly, is why did the BBC broadcast it live?
Hmm. Yes, I mean, this is one of those strange, sort of, I guess it's like a virus, some sort of mental infection that has caught not just governments, but the media and the culture in the West to immediately want to celebrate and support the enemies of the West. What has I don't know how we got to this position. So that's what he was tying into. Now, of course, he has personal reasons for doing it, and he's taking the side of our enemies and the enemies of our allies, such as Israel, but they're not. They're not. He's from a different background, so I understand why he'd want to do it. But why should the BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation? I think that's what it stands for. I always thought it was the Biased Broadcasting Corporation, but apparently that's not it. But they they've decided that actually their initials stand for the Britain Bashing Corporation, or the
Ah, well, there you
Bashing
go.
Britain Corporation. They've taken on this strange virus. Now, where it comes from, well, I mean, we could spend a whole episode analysing that, but let's just note that it's there, that an anti British, anti patriotic, anti British allies fervour has gripped the zeitgeist such that that was allowed to happen. But it's so obviously evil to call for people to be killed like that that the BBC was forced to step down. I think um, one one other thing though that he also said, it was this has been noted and commented on. He said, in the same time that he said death to IDF, he said you can't have your country back, and this was a deliberate jibe, I think, at a rallying call that's now popular um, by certain MPs of Reform and the big movement under Tommy Robinson. We want our country back, so you can't have it back. Isn't that evil? So you can't. I've taken your country, and I want to kill the army of your ally. Just terrible, isn't it? The BBC, yes, shouldn't be broadcasting it, but it shouldn't have even been a question that they should broadcast it. That's the problem. He should. Why would it
Yeah.
even be considered?
Well, I think what's interesting here is that they knew what the agenda was. They knew what was coming out onto the platform. And it could have been quite easily have been changed. So they could have changed the slot. They could have broadcast certain sections in the recordings, that's the post-event recordings, and edited quite a lot. But what's interesting is that, as you say about the backtrack, is the BBC quite rarely comes out and says there's no place for anti-Semitism, etc. And then it goes on and talks about broadcasting standards. Well done. However, what's interesting is that the broadcaster has now said that it's going to take immediate changes to live streaming music events. Well, that's a bit after the Lord Mayor show, isn't it, really? The fact is that many people have taken to social media, to those in clubs, pubs, and and other places who've really been sort of affected by this. Because at the end of the day, to your point, it was a political platform. It was a very, very strong statement that was put out there. And unfortunately, when those sort of things happen, it doesn't go away. It's just sort of lurked, and unfortunately, it's still there. Where it's probably damaged the group in many ways, but ironically, because it went out live, some people are saying, well, it may have damaged them in terms of their viral. Outpouring of hate speech, etc., because of what they did. But some people are also countering that, saying, well, actually, many people will probably go and buy their records now as a
Yes.
result. So
Yeah.
what it's
No.
done is sort of fueled it. It's given them an opportunity to spread their word, which
Yes.
is a bad thing.
I think that the hate speech works for both the things that I was quoting, both the anti-IDF and the anti-English comment. Um, and it shows a complete disconnect, but not with what the BBC thinks within the corporation. There's been a rewriting of English history. So Bob Vylan says, as well as the comment that you can have your country back. Now I've actually shortened that because his original was very sweary. I chose not to quote it, but he was basically saying you can't have your country back. Then he went on to say this country was built on the backs of immigrants. Now that might work at least rhetorically in the United States, where there's some claim to it. Not really, but there's some claim to it.
Hmm.
But in Britain, that's not true. The country was built by the English, Welsh, and Scots and Irish,
Yep.
who've been living there for generations. Uh, not the Industrial Revolution, all British people do. It's only been very recently you've had significant numbers of people who aren't British, who are immigrants. And so what it just shows that maybe he doesn't even know what country he's in. But
Hmm.
that conflating of the history of Britain and America is quite common. And in the BBC, they're trying to rewrite history and say there's been black people in Britain for many, many years, simply because I think the argument is that some of the people who built Stonehenge might have had dark skin. It's some weird thing like that, but uh, doesn't really hang together. So what it's rather unsettling. It's that both
Yes.
that because it's not a one-off. Yes, they can apologise, take the stream down, and the BBC can do all that. But actually, it goes much deeper than that. They need to sort them out because I think they need to read the room. Things are changing,
Yep.
and people are not putting up with this sort of nonsense anymore.
Well, I agree. And in fact, just to conclude, the London's Metropolitan Police have said that the band are under investigation,
Yep.
not just because of what happened at Glastonbury, but also other concerts that they've performed at.
Oh, I
Well,
see.
we can see a common theme here. There have been many, many tears at different places.
Yes.
What does the public think? Mr. Pete, I wonder, are we going to see more rivers of flowing sorrow? Yeah, as we sort of think, well, we just need some time for happiness. Where is it?
Where's the
What do we need to
happiness?
do? Where's the
Where's the joy?
happiness?
Yes.
Where's the joy?
Yes. Let
Yes.
us know. Please send in your comments. We'd really like to know, and let us know what you think on any of the issues. You can do that by either commenting on x.com or even Twitter, and you can do it also by going to markandpete.com. Make sure you're subscribed, and then you can make a comment on this and every episode. Um, Now, Micah 6, verse 8 says, He has shown you what is good, referring to God. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Yeah, I wish some of our subjects today would have thought more about that. But that's enough from us. That's enough from Mark and myself for this week. Catch you next time.